So first, I want to thank Dora and Sebastian for inviting me to present my book as part of Qesher Books Club. And thank you, all of you that are attending today. I just want to make a little correction that I am from Texas A&M University and not Texas University. It's two different universities that are actually rivals. But I am from Texas A&M University. I am a professor emerita. I retired from the university after being there for 30 years, teaching design studios and teaching seminars on sacred architecture, historic preservation, and building technology. And my research mainly focused on sacred architecture, and I published 5 books in that, and I'll talk about it in a minute. So, but first of all, I want to say that as a second generation to a Holocaust survivor, I dedicate this lecture to those who were murdered on October 7th in southern Israel, and to those who were abducted and are still being kept hostages by the terrorist organization Hamas. So before talking about my book, The Architecture of Modern American Synagogues from 1950s and 1960s, let me tell you what caused me to write this book. So can you see the next slide? No? Okay, thank you. My first assignment as a young architect, just graduated from the Israeli Institute of Technology, was to design a synagogue. Though this proposal was never built, it triggered my curiosity of what makes a building sacred and how architecture can express this sacredness. That brought me to conduct my PhD research on 19th century churches built by immigrants who arrived directly from Europe to Galveston, spreading in South Central Texas. I have concluded that in building their churches, the immigrants' traditions, culture, and religion were stronger than accommodating their churches to the harsh climate of Texas summers. As such, they built it as a mirror of the churches they left behind. Following this study of these people's churches, I wanted to explore sacred architecture of a prominent architect, such as Frank Lloyd Wright. This investigation resulted in my first book, Frank Lloyd Wright's Sacred Architecture, Faith, Form, and Building Technology, that I have published in 2012. In that book, I have developed a conceptual model that attempts to decipher the major factors in designing a sacred building via the relationship between faith, form, and building technology. This model became the cornerstone of my next books, Modernism and American Mid-20th Century Sacred Building, published in 2018, Water and Sacred Architecture, published in last May, and my current book, The Architecture of Modern Synagogue, 1950-1960, published last August, with its cover of the still soaring skeleton of Congregation Shaarei Tzedek Synagogue in Southfield, Michigan, that was built in 1962 and designed by architect Percival Goodman from New York, with Albert Kahn, associate from Detroit, as the resident architects and construction supervisors. I was asked why I chose this archival picture of a steel skeleton for the book cover. It represents the innovations in building technology at the time and how architects pushed the envelope of design and created a new architectural aesthetics. The book Contextual Model explains why I have selected to study post-World War II modern American synagogue. It illustrates how the synagogues of that time express the juxtaposition of the search of Jewish identity post-World War II and the Holocaust, the move of congregation to the American suburbs, and the rise of modern architecture in America. The first part of identity search is relevant today following the situation of Jews in Israel and around the world. To understand the synagogue as a juxtaposition of these three, let me introduce you to the background of this synagogue's architecture, as well as to their basic design principles. These synagogues were built as part of American post-World War II construction boom of houses of worship and reflected the nation's post-war religious mindset and cultural pluralism. The search of identity of American Jews and European Jewish immigrants after the horrific event of the Holocaust urged congregation to depart from historism, leaving the traditional European styles of synagogues and the eclectic styles of synagogues in America, and express the ideal of a modern free Jew. In Israel, this search was devoted to building a new modern nation, while in America it was reflected in the design of new modern synagogues during the 1950s and 1960s. These buildings served as a vehicle to showcase congregations' resilience, confidence, and strength. The complexity of Jewish identity stems from historical factors that are still in the core of the search for identity even today. Historians identified three major forces that influence and still impact the search for Jewish identity in the modern world: Enlightenment, anti-Semitism, and Zion. Enlightenment drew Jews to discover the world beyond the boundaries of Judaism. Anti-Semitism is the ambiguous effect of exclusion and persecution. On one hand, it strengthens Jewish ties as a community, and on the other hand, weakens them. Zion, and I quote, is the centerpiece force of Jewish peoplehood, end of quote, which is the historical Hebrew title of the land of Israel. Though I detail each of these points in the book as related to post-World War II American Jewry search for identity and its impact on their synagogue design, each can relate to our current search of identity as expressed in current and future synagogue design. Modernism was expressed in simple, straightforward, bold, clean, new forms, following the modernist concept of form follows function, that in the case of sacred architecture became form follows faith. This design was also influenced by new building technologies such as materials, system, and construction method, and created a new aesthetics. Architect Philip Johnson demonstrated modern design ideas in his synagogue, Knesset Israel in Port Chester, New York, while a simple rectangular steel box comprised of 7 panels punctuated with slits of painted glass. When asked about symbolism, he answered that all the parts were designed functionally. Thus, he stuck with his idea of form follows function. Similar was his reaction to the congregation interpretation of the ceiling of the synagogue. They saw it as the tent symbolizing the 40 years of people of Israel wandering in the desert. While Philip Johnson said that he designed functional sails of plaster that gives a sense of containment to the space and act as light buffers. In my search, I learned that Judaism as a faith does not have any guidelines for the exterior design and focuses only on the interior. In antiquity, synagogues builders tried to imitate the Holy Jerusalem temples. However, there are no specific references in the Bible for the first temple, except of mentioning the tabernacle as the model for the interior. The absence of specific guidelines for the exterior design continues through history, and therefore, Jews afraid from persecution and coping with strict state or city ordinance against building synagogues, build their synagogue in a style like the houses of worship of the country they lived in, thus churches or mosques. However, the interior was always cared for and built as a house of people, a house of gathering, Bet Knesset in Hebrew. Only the high temple was considered as a house of God. The main design guidelines for the synagogue interior are: the ark must face toward Jerusalem. The sanctuary must include a bima, a podium from where the Bible is read, A menorah should stand on the side of the ark as a symbol of light and freedom, as well as the eternal light, in Hebrew ner tamid, a lamp, which hangs above the ark and is lit day and night to symbolize the spiritual light of Judaism. Another important guideline is the establishment of an axis between the ark and the bima that, influenced by the origin of the congregation, Ashkenazi or Sephardi, has determined the seating arrangement. The central plan, where the worshippers sit around the bima, is on the left. The axis plan, where the congregation sit facing each other, and the focal point plan as a theater plan on the right side of the slide. In America, most of the modern synagogues use the theater arrangement with the focal point plan. In Orthodox synagogue, there is a required separation seating arrangement between men and women, and this is one of an example of a balcony for women sitting. As I mentioned before, modernist architects bridged between modernism and Judaism, reflecting the American Jewish context of the time, and expressed the congregation pride in their modern identity. Three of those architects, Eric Mendelsohn, Frank Lloyd Wright, and Minoru Yamasaki, introduced three key developments: the departure from historism, the design of the American synagogue, and modern cathedral synagogue as a grand institution. This design concept influenced the design of synagogues and showed the transition from the modern functional design of 1950s into a modern expressionism in 1960s. Though each of the three developments were interpreted by architects in different ways, they all push the envelope of design and construction and geared toward structural integrity. The first published testimony of how synagogue design should depart from historism and the old land tradition and accept the new time and the new land of America was written by architect Eric Mendelsohn as a manifest in 1947. He believed that, and I quote, "Our temples should apply contemporary building construction and architectural concept to make the house of God as part of the democratic community in which we dwell." End of quote. And the synagogue should reflect the Bible as a living truth. I have selected to study this Park Synagogue in Cleveland, Ohio, designed in 1953, since it still stands and serves as a synagogue, while his first synagogue, Bnei Emunah, in University City, Missouri, from 1950, was adapted for an art center. Also, some scholars established that Park Synagogue is probably representing the fullest expression of Mendelssohn's vision. Moreover, Mendelssohn included the notion of a synagogue as a complex of three main wings: the praying wing, a sanctuary and a chapel, a social wing adjacent to the sanctuary, and an education wing, a school built around a courtyard. Frank Lloyd Wright, the American famous architect, designed more than 30 houses of worship for various faiths and in different locations through the United States. Only 10 were built, among them Bet Shalom Synagogue in Elkin Park, Pennsylvania in 1954. Wright combined universal sacred element, local Native American art, and Jewish symbols to create the American synagogue. Like all his houses of worship, it expresses the American value of freedom of religion and reflects the links to the American landscape, such as the combination of Jewish symbols with local Native American art. The pyramidal roof, for example, is the symbol of Mount Sinai, where the Ten Commandments were given to the people of Israel. while it resembles the Native American teepee. Another example is the design of the steel tripod that holds the pyramidal roof, which is doubled layer with glass and plexiglass sheets that symbolizes the menorah with its 7 candle holders, while decorated by Native American art motifs. In the interior, Wright continued the triangular model of the roof. Please note his design of the ark, the bema, the eternal light above the ark, and the major chandelier in the sanctuary. The chandelier's design expresses the Kabbalistic belief that only through a series of colors with a specific meaning may God reveal himself to men. However, some claim that the triangle is a symbol for the 3 fathers in Judaism, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, while others see it based on Native American art motifs. In other words, Wright bridged Judaism with American culture to create the American synagogue. The third architect who influenced the design of synagogues is Minoru Yamasaki, who is best known for his design of the Twin Towers in New York City. He designed 2 synagogues, but only one was selected for the book, since the other was built in 1970s, which is beyond the period discussed in the book. Yamasaki's 1964 design of North Shore Congregation Israel in Glencoe, Illinois, introduced the modern interpretation of the Cathedral Synagogue as a grand institution. The design reflected the transition from Eric Mendelssohn's Spirit of the Age design concept to capture a sense of pride and eternity. It illustrates concrete as a sculptural material with concrete entrance that looks like a fan, or as others interpreted, a palm front, and the side of the concrete vaulted panels, which are seen by the congregation as hands in prayer. The sanctuary illustrates how modern expressive design in concrete can evoke spirituality, and shows Yamasaki poetic design based on symmetry, human proportion, and light. Yamasaki provided the abstracted Jewish symbols, like the ark, which was designed in collaboration with artist Lee Desson. Yamasaki provided a white niche in the concrete wall behind the stage for the artist to tuck in the wooden ark decorated with gilded leaf. The frame of white wall embracing the cabinet is viewed as a talit, which usually embraces the rabbi, the cantor, and the worshiper who wears it. Modern architects followed this development in designing synagogues and added their own unique input, pushing the aesthetic and building technology of synagogues while bridging modernism with Judaism. Due to the short time I have, I'll show you only very few examples that illustrate some of the flexible design, the inclusion of abstract art, and the notion of sustainable design. You are welcome to read the details of the other design concept and see more examples in Chapter 5 entitled Pushing the Envelope, Architectural Illustrations. Percival Goodman, a professor of architecture in Columbia University from 1946 to 1971, designed more than 50 synagogues around the nation. He introduced flexible design solutions that were followed by all other architects who designed synagogue then and even today. Flexible design of sanctuary accommodates different times of services. When during the Shabbat, there are more people in the synagogue than during weekdays, and during holidays, there are more people than during Shabbat. Architect Philip Johnson said, and I quote, "The problem of designing this contemporary synagogue is a nearly impossible one, since the sanctuary needs to act like an accordion, with a large capacity for high holidays and small numbers of worshippers for daily and Shabbat services," end of quote. He also declared that only after solving this functional problem, the artist can turn to the spiritual aspect of the synagogue. To accommodate the variation in occupancy for different services, Goodman designed the social hall or the lobby adjacent to the sanctuary with dividing partitions or doors already in 1950s with his design of Congregation Bnei Israel Synagogue in New Jersey, and continued with this solution in all his synagogue. For example, like in this slide, in the 1962 flexible design of Congregation Shaarei Tzedek Synagogue in Southfield, Michigan. He also suggested to design a separate chapel for smaller capacity for worshipers, thus daily Shabbat services with fewer practitioners. Mendelssohn designed a small separated chapel for daily services in his Park Synagogue in Cleveland, in addition to a partition between the sanctuary and the foyer assembly hall to open during the high holiday services. The chapel, right in the slide, was designed with the spiritual concept of the prophet Ezekiel as a little sanctuary and followed the material and motif of the main sanctuary. The book's chapter 4 describes the details of the various decorative symbols. In cases when the congregation added a chapel years later and commissioned a different architect, the result was not always compatible with the original idea of modern abstract poetic interior. This is an example of the added chapel to Yamasaki's 1964 North Shore Congregation Synagogue in Glencoe, Illinois. The new chapel followed the round exterior design as envisioned by Yamasaki in his site plan proposal, but the interior was designed by local architect Hammond, Bibi, and Babka in 1979. The chapel was designed in postmodernism style that contrasts and the modernist style of the sanctuary. Specifically, he was inspired by the traditional Sephardic synagogue of Venice. Indeed, when I visited the chapel, I felt as if I returned hundreds of years back in history to a traditional historical European synagogue with eclectic details drawn from various styles and profoundly different from the original modern sanctuary. Additional important contribution of modern American synagogues is the introduction of abstract art into the sanctuary. The artwork was elevated from Judaica functional elements to abstracted artistic contributions. In history, the inclusion of art in synagogue depended on the strictness of the interpretation of the second commandment, "Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image," Exodus 20, verse 4. Jews throughout history interpreted this law to restrict any artistic creation in the synagogue. This meaning was intensified by the verse, "With me, therefore, you shall not make any gods silver, or shall you not make for yourself any gods of gold." Thus, the idea was to avoid art that may depict an image of God and the holy and tempt the worshiper to return to paganism, or later to turn to Christianity. Though the Talmud was never clear about the inclusion of art in synagogues and did not mention it as an outright forbidden attitude, the negative interpretation toward art remained. In addition, periods of hostility of the Gentile prevented Jews from glorifying the exterior of their synagogues. However, these restrictions did not limit the expression of Jewish liturgical practice and Jewishness in the interior design and decoration of the synagogue, and we witnessed this phenomena through history. The significance of artwork, especially abstract art, at the outside and inside of the synagogues was accepted by congregation, and their leaders started to be notable in post-World War II America, reflecting in part the Jewish search for identity. This search expressed the quest for art's humanization and enhancement that would lift the spirit, Regardless, the synagogue's interior was assumed to be simple in order not to distract the worshippers and to withstand the threat of idolatry. Though Percival Goodman was the first to collaborate with artists to include abstract art in his synagogue, I want to show you how this concept influenced some other architects. Here is one of many examples, the 1958 Chicago Loop Synagogue in downtown Chicago, designed by architects Lobel, Schlossman, and Bennett. It demonstrates a simple design that highlights the stained glass east wall designed by artist Abraham Rutter. The abstract art was inspired by the verse in Genesis chapter 1, "Let it be light." You can read the details of all the symbols of this piece of the wall in the book. The entrance to the Chicago Loop Synagogue in Chicago is decorated with a bronze sculpture made by Israeli artist Henry Nehemiah Azaz. The sculpture welcomes the worshiper or visitor with its symbol of hand in peace and a blessing verse in Hebrew and in English from the book of Numbers. "The Lord bless thee and keep thee. The Lord make his face to shine upon thee and be gracious to thee. The Lord lift up his countenance upon thee and give thee peace." The last special contribution that I'd like to share with you is the introduction of sustainable synagogue design that bridge modernism and sustainability with Judaism. The UN World Commission on Environment and Development, as well as the World and US Green Building Council, define sustainability and develop design and planning criteria. Though the analysis of Temple Mount Sinai in El Paso from 1960 was not conducted along the specific criteria of the current system of LEED, still, it demonstrates architect Sidney Eisenstadt regional and sustainable concept in the synagogue design. Eisenstadt, a Los Angeles-based architect, devoted much of his practice to designing synagogue, Jewish academic buildings, and community centers. He became an influential architect of modern synagogue, especially in California and the West Coast. The exterior sustainable element expressed in this synagogue are the indigenous landscape that is based on local plants and stone and the form of the building. Eisenstadt created a modern parabolic concrete shell mountain in the desert, which reflects the surrounding mountains. This shell established a local place, a synagogue that belongs to the region. Since mountains are considered habitat of God, this sustainable measure can be considered as a stewardship to God. The concrete shell is finished with mosaic pieces in white, cream, and variation of brown to express the terrain color tone and ease the reflective light behind the arc in a very controlled lighting design that takes into consideration the glare of the desert region. The sanctuary vault, and that symbolizes the tabernacle tent, can be considered as shelter from the outside harsh environment of the desert. It sheltered me from the harsh wind during my visit. The thick concrete vault and walls also help with cooling and heating the building via thermal mass effect. This effect is known and accepted as an effect as a sustainable measure in a hot, arid desert environment. The combination of this solution with an HVAC system that is installed throughout the building makes the sustainable design efficient. The last chapter of the book before the concluding remark is entitled Adaptation and Changes. Congregation became very creative in solving the challenges of demographic changes and new required building codes and regulations, of energy conservation, and of changes in liturgy. In all cases, congregation attempted to maintain the integrity of modernity of their original houses of worship. Though there are many examples of changes and adaptation in the book, here is a special one that illustrates the solution to most of these changes. Temple Ohem Shalom in Baltimore, Maryland, designed by Walter Gropius with architect-in-residence Sheldon Levitt in 1960. As part of the 1987 renovation of the synagogue, architect Levin and Brown added new handles to the original entrance stairs and provided a new entrance on the side of the building as part of their addition of a new chapel. The addition of the new chapel and the entrance attempted to respect the original monument and with 4 decorative arches reflecting the original structural arches. The 2001 adaptation to the synagogue sanctuary is a dramatic example of creating a new accessible bima that also caters to liturgical changes. The original bima, as you can see on the left, was designed by architect Walter Gropius and Sheldon Levitt in 1960 as an elevated pedestal above the sloped up sitting area of the sanctuary. The architect believed that this arrangement enhanced the feeling of ascent and glorified the ark and the officiant who served the congregation. The wooden ark of 20 feet in shape of the tablet of the Ten Commandments was designed by artists Kepes and Purser. Almost 40 years later, Levin and Brown architects renovated and configured the sanctuary by reversing the location of the bima to the rear side of the original sanctuary, as you can see on the right. The design of a new niche from stone to host a new metal and glass ark, for which they won the 2003 Honor Award by the American Institute of Architects Interfaith Forum of Religion, Art and Architecture, and by Faith and Form magazine. They left the original bima to serve as a balcony for additional seating in the back. The change in orientation from the traditional direction toward Jerusalem was justified already by architect Eric Mendelsohn, who claimed that God is all around us, and therefore it does not matter where the bima and ark are located. Architect Levin and Brown also reversed the seating to slope down toward the new bima, which is lower and smaller in size and scale. This change provides accessibility to the bima, fulfilled the American Disability Act requirement, generate more intimate worship experience that complies with the liturgical changes in conservative and reform synagogues, where there is an attempt to bring officiant and congregates closer together, both spatially and psychologically. In addition, the new seating arrangement allowed the worshiper to view and enjoy the original stained glass windows designed by Kepes in 1960s. In the original design, the congregates sat with their back to those windows. In my visit to the synagogue, I talked to the rabbi and members of the building committee about these drastic modifications. The conversation revealed the involvement of the congregation and their debates during the design process. Though there are many examples of changes and adaptation and maintain the modern integrity of the synagogue, I want to share with you one that was very challenging and I believe can serve as an example of a great solution to the problem of accessibility. In 2011, the firm of John Milner Architect from Chatford, Pennsylvania, designed and added an elevator at the side entrance of Frank Lloyd Wright Bet Shalom Synagogue. This elevator served the congregates through all levels of the synagogue, from the sanctuary level to the lower level of the Sisterhood Chapel and accessible restroom and the basement. This sensitive addition was seen by the architect and engineer as, and I quote, challenging both from the standpoint of preservation and technical feasibility, end of quote. The elevator was constructed in the area east of the sanctuary to minimize intervention to the original building and to provide accessibility to both sanctuaries. The only changes that result from the elevator's installation in that area where the dismantle of the rabbi study, the replacement of one of the back stairs behind the Sisterhood Chapel with a ramp, the modification to the South Organ chamber, and the enlargement of an existing interior door in the main sanctuary to enter from the elevator, which, as you can see, visually had minimal impact when viewed from the sitting area. In the case where most of the congregation moved to a different part of the city, such as the congregation of Park Synagogue, they also carry with them the pride and love for their original synagogue, in this case, Mendelssohn Park Synagogue. In 2005, they commissioned St. Brook architects who were inspired by Mendelssohn's original design of the bima from 1950 in the left of the slide. And similarly, they designed the bima with a wooden canopy above the ark, obstructing Mendelssohn's original canopy, as you can see on the right of the slide. In summary, it was exciting to write the book about my journey to learn sacred architecture of American Jewry. This architecture expressed my people's way of life, our faith, our strength and resilience, and the realization of the American value of freedom of religion. I analyzed these buildings that were not given by appropriate attention in the study of modern architecture and pertinent publications. I found one common and important theme shared in all the designs: the participation, involvement, and contributions of the congregations to the project from the start of the design to the final building of the synagogue. Thank you. And please.
Thank you so much, Anna. Thank you for this wonderful presentation and sharing your research and your book with us. It was really, really wonderful to learn from you. And of course, I see a lot of or a few questions, and please feel free to add more questions. Now we will enter into the Q&A part of the session. But I just want to let everyone know that tomorrow we will send out the recording of this presentation, also the link where you can purchase the book. So if anyone is interested in reading and learning more about what Anat was explaining, then you will have the information where to get it. It's also on the website where you registered, by the way. So if anyone wants to already go there today, then you can find it, but you will receive it from us tomorrow. And I just want to tell you, Anat, that a lot of people recognize their own synagogues and places they have been. So we've been receiving in the chat already people saying that they're members of different synagogues you showed, or they have been there. So I'm sure it was very interesting.
I have many people that approach me from these synagogues, but many others from other synagogues asking me, why my synagogue is not part of the book? And I want to say that one of the reasons that I had to select under such a criteria is because at that time, 1,800 synagogues were built around the nation of the United States. So I had to do some selection, and my criteria were based on, first of all, that the synagogue was built in 1950s or 1960s and still remains and serves as a synagogue. And another one was that it was in the suburb of a big city. And the third one was that it was designed by a prominent modern architect. So
thank you. So I will read some questions that came in.
Sure.
So the first question was, to the extent we know, could we indicate for these synagogues which are Orthodox, conservative, or Reform?
Okay, so I picked up from all of them. So some of them are Orthodox, some of them are conservative, and some of them are Reform. And in the book, I specify it definitely, and I'm sorry I didn't specify it in the lecture, but for example, the first one that I showed, the interior of the Tribeca Synagogue in New York City, is Orthodox. And Frank Lloyd Wright is conservative. And Yamasaki is, the one in Glencoe is Reform, but there are, in each of them, I specified in the book, and I'm sorry I didn't specify them.
Thank you. The next question was about Eric Mendelssohn. Is he the same architect who designed Bauhaus building in Tel Aviv and the Hadassah Mount Scopus Hospital in Jerusalem?
Yes.
And if you could tell a little bit about his story,
Right.
because there is in this comment, you can already read that he was from Germany and that he moved to Tel Aviv and then to America. Yeah.
Yes, definitely. He was from Germany. He was a German architect, and he built there and the Einstein Institute, that is very, very modern design of the time. It's a tower, Einstein Tower, it's called. And he was very much involved with the Bauhaus movement at the time in Germany. However, when the Nazis came, he fled, and he fled first to Israel. And he did some designs like the Hadassah. And I had the privilege when I worked in Israel as an architect, as a practitioner, to add some additions to the Hadassah hospital of his origin. And he also contributed to the wonderful Bauhaus buildings in Tel Aviv. However, he wanted also to be faculty in the Technion, in the Israeli Institute of Technology, but they told him that he has to learn Hebrew before he can teach. And that was a big mistake because it's very tough to learn Hebrew, and he just had an opportunity to leave, and he went to the United States. And he came to the United States and he focused on designing synagogues. He designed 6 synagogues, but only one was completed before he died. He died very early in his life, like 1957, if I'm not mistaken. And he did not complete everything, but he completed the design. So Bnei Emunah in Missouri was the one that was completed before he died. Park Synagogue was under construction and completed after he died. And there are other 5 synagogues that there are only in the stages of sketches and plans. But as the rabbi of Park Synagogue said, he had visited the Mendelssohn, and he saw his work, and he was very, very impressed from his work, and they became very, very good friends. And even when Mendelssohn became very sick, the rabbi attended to him and helped him. And he said that he was one of the most inspiring person and architect.
Thank you so much for sharing his story. I see some more comments, people sharing about other synagogues that could have been potentially part of your book. You mentioned that there are many. For example, here I see mentioned Germantown Jewish Center in Philadelphia by Harry Sternfeld. Someone is
I am familiar. I'm familiar with many. I traveled around the nation for doing documenting the synagogues. I had many synagogues in my files, but as I said, I had to select and be more strict in my selection. And one of the things is, for example, the one in Philadelphia, although it's very beautiful, the architect is not a known modernist, and that's why it was not selected.
Thank you. And I'll read another question that just came in. It seems by choosing synagogues designed by prominent architects, and from the photos chosen, you only studied large cathedral-type synagogues with about 1,000 or so family members. The vast majority of US synagogues serve memberships of 100 to 500 families. Did you look at how these large synagogue projects influenced the smaller synagogue projects?
First of all, at that time, when people moved to the suburb, they had a wonderful opportunity to start from scratch and to build new and to express their, as I said, pride and resilience. With Mendelssohn's idea of a complex synagogue, not just a praying synagogue with different wings, the synagogues became very big. They became complexes and not just one little building. So all the small synagogues that were built following were mostly for only the prayer wing and not the whole thing, because later on in the 70s, start to divide between community activities and the prayer activities. So synagogue did not have anymore the community social areas that needed to be in the big synagogues of 1950s and 1960s. And so they divided it. But the influence is enormous because, first of all, art, abstract art, became part of also small synagogues. And also the idea of how do you express spirituality inside, and treatment of light, treatment of materials, the use of new materials, new systems that push the aesthetics, as I said, even of smaller ones. I hope I answered the question.
Yes, very, very good. Thank you very much. And if there are any more questions, please put them in the chat. And I see, just as I said, that another one came in. I'm just checking if it's a comment or a question. I realize that your focus is on modern synagogues built in the 1950s, but I'd like it if you briefly could make a connection between these massive spaces and the more traditional synagogue styles, such as the overhead large dome or the sanctuary with a women's mezzanine above, both of which seem, at least to me, to create a less massive effect than these do.
So I think I mentioned it in the beginning that the idea was to depart from anything that was traditional and anything that was history, because they wanted to start afresh. They wanted to express a new Jew, new democratic, full of hope Jew, and not to relate to anything that was connecting them to European style, traditional style, and not connecting them to eclectic styles that were in America. And that's why we see this style and not the others. And I write about this in the book. I write about the search for identity as part of this influence on architecture to find the idea. And that's why they adopted modernism, because it gave them the opportunity to depart from traditions.
Thank you very much. And thank you also, Aaron, for sharing a documentary recommendation that anyone can read now in the comments. And I'm just going to check if there are more questions. Okay. Okay, I'll read the next question that came in. There are a lot of long questions, so I don't have time now to analyze, but I hope you can follow it through. Over the years,
You are welcome to write me in an email if anybody wants to discuss more with me or to point out different things in their synagogues. I would love you to contact me. It's a-geva@tamo.edu.
we can send it also in tomorrow's follow-up email. We will send your email address to all the registrants. Thank you.
And there is another email of Gmail that you have, and you can share. You can share, and please do not hesitate, and you can ask me any questions that, or discuss with me, or point out, or please.
Okay, so I will just read these last few questions that came in, and then we will share Anat's email address. Over the years, some of these synagogues were found to be somewhat impractical to maintain and use, and viewed as large or impersonal. I know this as a retired executive director, a question by David. In addition to lower more accessible bimas and more intimate prayer spaces. How are some of these monumental buildings being retrofitted? Additionally, how have security concerns affected these buildings?
Okay, so I'll have to ask whoever commented to read the chapter Changes and Adaptation in the book, because there are many examples of how these factors actually influence how people preserve their modernity on one hand, but adapted and changed according to the new demand of energy conservation, of building code, etc. And I showed you 2 examples, but there are more in the book.
Mm-hmm.
And I give lectures about this, about this topic, which I call Changes and Adaptation Beyond Brick and Mortar, because it's beyond the actual physical maintenance. It's more about what happened with the years with the congregation in relationship to these huge buildings.
Thank you. And another question, how do synagogues differ in Israel? I guess built in the same period. How are they different?
As I said in the beginning, in Israel, in that period, everything was devoted to build the nation. They didn't think about the synagogues. So the synagogues at that period were very, very simple, modest, for the need and the function of praying and gathering, but not as monumental or grandiose like in America, because it was focused on that. Later, in the 1970s, 1980s, 1990s, it started to be a focus of congregations, a focus of architects to actually design synagogues that are more as a grand cathedral as the ones, but it was like more than a decade after what happened in America, because of the focus that changed between that time to the other time. And today, it's a very modern and contemporary styles of architecture that are used in everything, but also in synagogue designs.
Thank you so much. And I just want to add that from a European point of view, it's so interesting to see how, like in Europe, all this infrastructure was built like in the 19th century, like to this extent, like in the US in the 20th. And it's so interesting to see the difference in styles and how the approach and everything. So it was wonderfully interesting to learn about American synagogues.
It's very interesting that books about synagogues in Europe are many books about them. And there is one, especially a huge volume of synagogues in Europe. And the author really documented and wrote about. And there are very, very few that are concentrating on America. And it was so different.
Yes, indeed. So thank you so much for documenting it and writing it. And really, it's wonderful to learn from you. And we will close for today. I don't see now more questions, but I hope those of you who do have questions, you can buy the book and read it or be in touch with Anat. So we will send all this information to you tomorrow. And we want to thank you all for joining us. We will have 2 more talks this week. On Thursday, we will have an event about the origin of Ashkenazi Jewish names. So we jump back a little bit to Europe. And on Sunday, we will have a talk about the Jews of Indonesia. So we are spreading over all the continents, and we hope you can join us also on other sessions. And thank you again, Anat, for sharing with us your knowledge and your expertise.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of the day. Bye.